There's a specific kind of quiet that happens when someone decides to stop. Not the quiet of failure. Not the quiet of burnout, at least not entirely. The quiet of someone who looked at the scoreboard, understood the game completely, and decided to walk off the field anyway. You've seen these people. Maybe you work with one. Maybe you were one, or you're thinking about becoming one. They're not miserable. They're not lost. There's something harder to categorize, and the research on what's actually happening in their heads when they make this choice will genuinely change how you see ambition. Let's start with why the race exists at all, because the rat race isn't a conspiracy. It isn't something capitalism invented from scratch to keep people obedient and productive. It's more uncomfortable than that. It's deeply, almost elegantly, aligned with how human brains evolved over hundreds of thousands of years. Your brain has a system called the mesolimbic pathway. It's your reward circuit, and it lights up in a specific way when you get promoted, when your salary increases, when someone important acknowledges your work. A 2019 study from Cornell University found that status rewards activate the same neural pathways as food, sex, and addictive substances. Your brain, the one you use to make rational decisions about your career and your future, literally treats a title upgrade like a chemical hit. But it runs deeper than that. We are tribal animals. For roughly 300,000 years, your survival depended almost entirely on your position in the social hierarchy. Higher status meant better access to resources, better mates, more protection from the group. Lower status meant exposure, scarcity, real danger. So your brain didn't evolve to be indifferent to status. It evolved to be obsessed with it, to track it constantly, to feel genuine distress precisely when it slips, and genuine relief precisely when it rises. That's not ambition as a character flaw. That's survival instinct wearing a business suit. And modern economies have built something close to a perfect system for exploiting that instinct. Small wins, constant feedback, visible metrics, clear hierarchies. You hit the quarterly target and get a bonus. The bonus funds a lifestyle upgrade. The lifestyle upgrade quietly raises your baseline. Now you need the next bonus just to feel like you're standing still. Psychologists call this the hedonic treadmill, and research from Princeton University confirms what most high performers already sense but rarely say out loud. The baseline for what feels like enough keeps resetting. The more you earn, the more earning becomes necessary to feel the same. So most people aren't weak for staying in the race. They're not brainwashed, not shallow, not failing to see through some obvious illusion. They're following 300,000 years of evolutionary programming that says climb higher, earn more, secure your position. Their brains are working exactly as designed. And the system they're embedded in is expertly built to keep rewarding that behavior in just enough doses to keep them moving. It is, in the truest sense, an elegant trap. Then there are the others, the ones who get to some point on the ladder, not always the top, often nowhere near it, and simply stop. They take the job with better hours and a worse title. They move to the cheaper city. They stop tracking the metrics that used to define them. From the outside, it looks like retreat, like something broke, or they couldn't keep up, or they decided to settle for less. Except that framing misses almost everything about what's actually happening. A 2021 study from the London School of Economics tracked people who had voluntarily downshifted their careers, not because of layoffs or failure, but by deliberate choice. What the researchers found was striking. These individuals showed different patterns of activation in the prefrontal cortex when evaluating trade-offs between money and time, status, and autonomy. For most people, the brain's reward centers fire reliably at the prospect of more money, more recognition, more visible achievement. But for the quiet exiters, that activation was muted. Not absent. Muted. Like their brains had recalibrated what actually counts as a reward worth chasing. Now, before you assign a value judgment to that, don't. This isn't about one brain being superior. It isn't about the climbers being shallow or the exiters being enlightened. Both responses are real. Both are shaped by genetics, experience, environment, and a lifetime of what got reinforced and what got ignored. But understanding why some brains make this shift and what changes the calculus is where things get genuinely interesting. Consider what that actually means. The same information, the same job offer, the same salary bump lands differently in a brain that has genuinely recalibrated. Where most people feel the pull of more, these brains feel something closer to indifference. Not depression, not burnout, not inability, indifference. And that indifference isn't a symptom of something going wrong. According to the research, it correlates with higher activation in areas of the prefrontal cortex associated with long-term planning and value integration. Their brains aren't less responsive. They're responding to a different set of signals entirely. Because here's what nobody tells you about the quiet exits. They're not random. They don't happen to people who never cared about achievement. The research suggests almost the opposite. The people who walk away from the race are often the ones who ran it hardest, who understood the rules, who played well enough to see what winning actually looked like up close, and found that it didn't match what they'd been imagining they were running toward. Something shifts. Not always loudly, not always in a way the person could articulate in the moment, but something in the equation changes, and once it does, the old logic stops computing the same way. The promotions that used to feel like progress start feeling like obligations. The salary negotiations that once felt like victories start feeling like transactions in a currency that's slowly losing its meaning. And the question that surfaces, the one most people in the race have never stopped long enough to sit with, isn't how do I win? It's what am I even winning for? That question is where the real story begins, and the path from asking it to answering it, if an answer even exists, runs through some of the most uncomfortable territory a high-functioning person can navigate. Because the moments that push people out of the race aren't usually gentle. They arrive the way important things tend to, sideways at inconvenient times in forms that are very hard to look away from. For most people, the moment they start questioning the race doesn't arrive as an insight. It arrives as an interruption, something that cuts through the routine so completely that the routine can't quite reassemble itself the same way afterward. Sometimes it's the body. Dr. Christina Maslach's decades of research on occupational burnout at UC Berkeley documented what happens to the nervous system under sustained high-stakes pressure. The amygdala, your brain's ancient threat detection system, begins treating your email inbox the way it was designed to treat predators, not metaphorically, neurologically. The stress response that evolved to help you sprint from danger starts firing during performance reviews. Before presentations, when your phone buzzes at 11 at night, the race stops feeling like progress. It starts feeling like a threat you can't outrun because you're carrying it with you everywhere you go. Sometimes the interruption is more specific. You're 43 years old, and you're sitting in a doctor's office and the doctor uses words like stress-induced hypertension or pre-diabetic. And for a moment, the corner office you've been angling toward looks different. Not like an achievement, like a mechanism. Like something that's been slowly extracting something from you that you assumed was renewable and is now, with clinical clarity, being measured. The math you'd been running on ambition and future reward suddenly has a variable in it you weren't accounting for. And sometimes it's sitting in a hospital room. Your father is in the bed, and he's whispering. And what he whispers is that he wishes he'd worked less. Not vaguely, specifically. He names things he missed. He names people he didn't know as well as he wanted to. And something in the way he says it, the weight of the specificity, doesn't feel like advice. It feels like information. It lands somewhere that arguments and articles and productivity podcasts never quite reached. These aren't epiphanies in the inspirational sense. They're recalibrations. Something in the brain's reward equation shifts. The future, which most human brains treat as abstract and therefore deeply discountable, suddenly feels real in a way it didn't before. Research from the Journal of Positive Psychology, published in 2020, found that people who successfully exit high-pressure career tracks tend to score higher on what psychologists call temporal discounting flexibility, essentially the capacity to feel future outcomes as vividly as present ones. Their brains can hold the image of themselves at 65, exhausted and accomplished, and feel it as a real cost rather than a distant abstraction. That's not weakness. That's a different architecture of judgment. But here's what nobody tells you about what comes next. The exit is not relief. Not cleanly, not immediately, and for many people, not for a long time. The first thing that goes is identity. Your job title has been your answer to the question of who you are for years, maybe for most of your adult life. It's how you introduce yourself at parties. It's the metric you use when you're measuring yourself against the version of yourself you imagined at 22. A 2018 study from the University of Michigan found that career identity becomes so deeply embedded in the self-concept that losing it, even voluntarily, even gratefully, triggers neural patterns that look remarkably similar to grief. When you step off the ladder, you have to answer a question most people never actually ask themselves directly. Who am I when I'm not the thing I've been optimizing to become? Then there's the social pressure, and it's more persistent than most people anticipate. Your brain is wired to track the tribe's opinion. It evolved that way for the same reason it evolved to pursue status, because deviating from the group used to be dangerous. When you downshift, the people around you respond with a mix of genuine concern and something more uncomfortable. Research from Yale University shows that people who make unconventional life choices often trigger what psychologists call social comparison anxiety in the people around them. Not hostility, exactly, but a kind of discomfort that turns into questions. Are you okay? Did something happen? Is everything all right at home? Their concern is real, but it's also the social immune system doing its job. You've deviated from the script, and deviation makes people examine their own choices, and that examination is not always welcome. There's also the financial fear, and this one doesn't follow logic the way you'd expect. Studies from the Financial Psychology Center show that people who voluntarily downshift their incomes report elevated anxiety about money, even when their actual financial situation remains stable, even when they've run the numbers, even when they know they're fine. Because it's not the numbers that feel destabilizing. It's the loss of the upward trajectory. The trajectory was safety. The trajectory was proof that things were getting better, that you were getting better. Without it, stability feels precarious in a way that stability with a rising income never did. And then there's the loss of the game itself. This one is the strangest to explain to someone who hasn't experienced it, because it sounds like it shouldn't be a problem. You love the challenge of high performance, the clear metrics, the competition, the adrenaline of delivering under pressure. Research on achievement motivation is consistent on this point. High performers often become addicted, not just to the rewards of the race, but to the structure the race provides, the clarity, the measurability. When you exit, you don't just lose the treadmill. You lose the architecture around the treadmill, the thing that told you at any given moment whether you were winning or falling behind. So the quiet exiters aren't arriving in some blissful, decompressed paradise. They're trading one set of problems for a completely different and often harder set. The stress goes down, the questions get bigger. And the biggest question, the one most of them haven't had to face since they were young enough that it felt hypothetical, is this. Without the scoreboard, without the external proof of progress, without the career narrative telling you what to optimize for, what do you actually want from your life? Most people who've been in the race for a decade or more have never sat with that question long enough to get an honest answer. When the race stops, the question doesn't disappear. It just finally gets quiet enough to hear. Here's what the research actually shows about the people who navigate this transition successfully. Not the ones who walked away and found immediate peace, because that's not most of them. The ones who walked away and built something real and livable on the other side. What they share isn't a personality type or a savings account balance or a particular philosophy about work. It's a set of psychological capacities that most of them developed not before they left the race, but during the actual discomfort of leaving it. The first is the capacity to tolerate judgment without being driven back by it, not to stop caring what people think, which is biologically implausible and not really the goal, but to feel the discomfort of other people's quiet disapproval and stay put anyway. To sit across from someone at a dinner party, answer the question of what you do with something honest and unimpressive, and let the slightly awkward silence that follows simply exist without rushing to fill it. The second is the ability to carry financial anxiety without letting it make decisions on your behalf. The anxiety doesn't disappear for most people who voluntarily downshift. Studies from the Financial Psychology Center confirm this consistently. But the ones who sustain the change learn to hold the anxiety without surrendering to it, to distinguish between fear that is flagging a genuine threat and fear that is simply the sound of a reward system adjusting to a different normal. The third is the willingness to sit with meaning questions without rushing toward resolution, not to answer the question of what you're optimizing for perfectly or quickly, but to stay in its presence, to say, I genuinely don't know yet, and treat that not as an emergency, but as a long, patient, necessary process. And the fourth is the hardest to describe cleanly. It's rebuilding identity not around what you do, but around how you actually live, around who you show up for and how consistently, around what you make, what you notice, what you choose when nothing is measuring you. That is not a soft or sentimental project. It is, structurally, harder than climbing a ladder. The ladder tells you exactly where you stand. This doesn't. Here's something that makes all of this feel less theoretical. A 2023 study from the University of Pennsylvania examined neuroplasticity in adults who made major voluntary lifestyle changes. What the researchers found was striking. With sustained effort, the brain's reward pathways can be literally reshaped. The things that used to generate strong activation, status symbols, competitive wins, visible markers of achievement, began producing measurably less response over time. And the things that had barely registered before, deep conversation, creative work, time in natural environments, began producing more. Not metaphorically, measurably. The brain can learn to want different things. But the critical word is sustained. This is not a decision you make once and carry forward automatically. It's a decision you remake continuously, every time you choose presence over performance, every time you let someone else's opinion of your choices sit uncomfortably without acting immediately to correct it. So if you're someone who has quietly walked away from the race, or who is seriously thinking about it, here is the most honest thing the research supports. You are not choosing the easier path. You are choosing a harder game with no rulebook, no reliable external metrics, and no scoreboard that tells you whether you're ahead or behind. The race answers that question for you. Every quarter, every annual review. What comes after requires you to build your own measures of a life that feels worth living. That is difficult. Unglamorous ongoing work. But it's work with a direction. Research on self-determination theory from the University of Rochester consistently shows that people who organize their lives around internally chosen values rather than external validation report higher intrinsic motivation over time. Not a spike of relief, sustained, compounding engagement with their own existence, because they have stopped performing their life for an audience and started actually living it instead. Many of them describe something quiet shifting in how time feels. When you're in the race, time is always running out, always being consumed against a target. But without the race, the texture of an ordinary week changes. People report remembering their days more clearly, noticing things they had stopped noticing, feeling less like they are skimming across the surface of their own life and more like they are actually inside it, present for it, able to say at the end of a week what actually happened. Which brings us back to where this started. Those people who quietly disappear from the corporate world, the ones who stop without announcing it, who trade the climb for something harder to name. They are not broken. They have not run out of ambition. Their ambition has simply recalibrated towards something the standard metrics were never designed to measure. A life that, when they examine it honestly, actually looks like theirs. They are not giving up. They are playing a different game. One with ambiguous rules, real costs, and no scoreboard. One where winning is something you have to define yourself in private without applause. And maybe, just maybe, that is the harder achievement.